Economic freedom sounds like a good concept. The more you learn about it, the better it sounds. And here to help us learn about economic freedom and to discuss the implications for North Carolina is Fred McMahon. He is Dr. Michael A. Walker Chair of Economic Freedom Research at the Fraser Institute. That organization compiles rankings of economic freedom. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here in North Carolina.
First of all, before we get into the rankings and what they say, when we're talking about economic freedom, what are we talking about?
Economic freedom is basically the ability of individuals and families to make their own economic decisions free of crony capitalist greed and free of overly ambitious government. So it means relatively low taxes. When government expropriates your property, it reduces your economic freedom. John Locke would have a lot to say about that, his view on property. It means relatively low government spending, even if the money comes from somewhere else, because the more government spends, the less room there is for free exchange. It means a sound legal system and sound property rights. That's probably the most important aspect of economic freedom, less so in North America or Europe, but in developing countries where they struggle with it, because without that, the rich and the powerful abuse their position to gather more riches and wealth. You should be able to trade with the world, and regulation should be low and in place only when necessary. Otherwise, it blocks your freedom to do things.
Sounds like the bottom line is something along the lines of making sure that people get to control as much of the income that they generate or the wealth that they have as possible.
That's true, but with the other aspect that they have more freedom to generate that income and that wealth by not having to face bizarre and onerous regulations, for example.
So tell us about how your institute puts together rankings that show just how well states, provinces in Canada, nations, how well they do on economic freedom.
Sure. We have several indexes, but two significant ones. Economic Freedom of the World, where we rank 162 jurisdictions, and Economic Freedom of North America, where we rank the Mexican states, the U.S. states, and the Canadian provinces. We use only third-party data because it's so easy to have subjective opinions on such things, and those will affect your rankings no matter how much you try to avoid it. So we use only third-party data, and we look at how much government spends, how much at the state level, how much government taxes, and labor regulations at the state level.
And in coming together with all of the data, then you end up, as we said, ranking the agencies. Do you think that this ranking proves helpful for people to see just how well their country stacks up against others or how well their state stacks up against others?
It's immensely helpful on the international area. I was in Lebanon last week, where a free market group is using the index to promote economic freedom in Lebanon. After that, I was in Bosnia, where again a local free market group is doing the same. Cote d'Ivoire, South Africa, Namibia. I've probably been to about 20 nations where local free market groups turn to the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World to judge how their nation is doing and to see where the reforms are necessary. Economic freedom in North America is more recent. The signal at the state level, because of course you're part of a nation, is a little bit more muted. But yes, this has been referred to in the congressional record, in any number of state houses. Free market institutes across the United States, like yours, like the John Locke Foundation, use it to talk to their legislators. Why aren't the people in our state as free as the neighboring states?
Economic freedom in and of itself sounds like a good thing, but economic freedom from your research correlates very well with some other things that we should like, doesn't it?
Yes. When the project was getting underway, Milton Friedman, who with Michael Walker and Rose Friedman basically coordinated the project, he said that economic freedom was an intrinsic right that people deserved to have, whether it made their lives better off or not. But he also said he didn't think it would endure unless it did make people's lives better off. Let me just say this. Look around the world, and look at the nations that are doing well and those that are doing poorly. There is no nation without free markets that has a stable democracy. There is no nation without free markets that has a high level of prosperity, except maybe petrostates. There is no nation without a high level of economic freedom that protects other rights and freedoms. And this is the social dynamics are complicated, but basically, if you're free economically, then you can explore other freedoms and insist on your other rights.
And this has been a fairly consistent finding from throughout the time that you've been doing this, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. For the economic freedom of the world, I think there are about 700 research articles in peer-reviewed journals and policy journals that look at it. And we did a study of that. I think something like 98% found positive effects of economic freedom. There are 250 on the economic freedom of North America, and those are also finding positive effects.
We are chatting with Fred McMahon with the Fraser Institute, who works on these economic freedom indices. Let's take a look now at how well both the country, the United States, and North Carolina are doing. First of all, I would suspect most of us think of the U.S. as a fairly free country economically. How do we stack up as a U.S.?
The United States has typically been in the top 10 of economic freedom globally. Around the time or shortly after the financial crisis, the United States briefly fell out of the top 10. And since about 2014, 2015, the United States has been rising again. So it was only briefly out of the top 10. It's back there now. Because we only use third-party data, the most recent year we have is 2017. But as I mentioned, the United States has been going up since 2014.
Now, would that have been, do you suspect, because of bailouts and other injection of fiscal stimulus and other things of that sort that would seem to fly in the face of economic freedom?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There was also a dip in the rule of law in the United States, at least a measure of the rule of law. Now, no measure of the rule of law is perfect. It's not a sharp point, it's a fuzzy smudge because it's so difficult to measure. But that fell too, and that fell after 2000 and one with the invasion of Iraq and terrorist arrests and so on. Now, by the way, just let me quickly say, as for anything in a freedom, there will be trade-offs, and you might say hunting down and controlling terrorism is an appropriate trade-off because you can't have freedom if you aren't safe. But that did bring the U.S. down after 2001.
But as you said, in recent years, back on the rise,
Yeah.
which is a good sign. How about North Carolina? Where do we stack up today, or at least in the latest data that you have, compared to other states in the United States?
North Carolina is around 15th right now, just looking at the state level. Interestingly, it's had some ups and downs in our index. I don't live here, and I'm not an analyst of policy, so I can't explain them. But it's mostly on the rise these days.
Yeah, and I think in looking at the numbers earlier, you were you and I saw that for a while we seemed to be hovering around 10th place, and now
Yeah.
we've been hovering around 15th. So among the better states, but not among the very top.
Exactly right.
In looking at the subcategories that you use, what are the ones that stand out to you?
Well, we use three subcategories to look at subnational governments: government spending, taxation, and labor market freedom. North Carolina does not do great on either government spending or on taxation, so you're around 25th. In other words, a little bit below your overall rank, and you're higher in your overall rank because you do very well in labor market freedom.
And one of the things that we've also seen is certainly in this decade, there has been, if not a jump, at least a rise that we may have bottomed out around the beginning of the previous decade, or now see our rankings going up. Is that something you've seen?
Yes, I see that in the ranks. As I say, I don't know enough about policy in North Carolina to explain that, but it's a good thing you're moving up.
In general, when you talk to folks in the state level and they're asking, well, what could we do to make our economic freedom ranking better? What are some of the things that they should be looking at? If not specifically for North Carolina, in general, what are the types of things that make an economic freedom ranking rise?
Lower government spending, leaving more space for free market exchange. And of course, the flip side of that is lower taxes. When you take a lot of money out of the economy, you discourage people from going there, but you also discourage in investment. Now, a lot of states have problems with labor market freedom. So, for instance, you'll have minimum wage laws that stop the poorest and the least educated from participating in the workforce, which is a tragedy. You'll have unions attempting to control the labor marketplace. And we also measure the size of government employment. If government employs too many people, again, you're taking them out of the free marketplace.
As you've moved forward with this, do you see signs that some agencies and government officials look at this report, find ways that they can make improvements, and then do it? I mean, is the index actually helping people get to more economic freedom?
We have some evidence that it is. Now, obviously, I can't be everywhere all at once, but our partners in the Economic Freedom Network of North America tell us it gives a very convincing story to their legislatures, helps them get through pieces of legislation. It's hard to pin direct causality to anything because no legislature is going to say, we did this because a Canadian think tank told us to do this. But we have heard that it's a very powerful tool in talking to legislatures.